My name is Ella Monroe. The morning my world splintered, my cousin brushed past me at her engagement party like I was a coat rack. An engagement is once in a lifetime, she sneered, as if my loss could ever be measured the same way. Funerals, she said, can wait. That line lodged in my throat like a stone and never left. My husband's name was Ben. He was quiet in the ways that mattered. Steady hands, steady heart. He laughed at my stupid jokes and knew which nights to stay up, and just hold me when everything inside me felt like a storm. The last month of his life was a blur of hospital corridors and machines that blinked messages I couldn't read. I sat at his bedside and said the things we never said out loud. I thought that would be the end of it. Grief, mourning, a family gathered around a grave. Instead, the day they lowered him into the ground, my family raised glasses under fairy lights. I stood in the church doorway and watched empty pews swallow my chances for a last touch. A hand on a shoulder, a word spoken that might have steadied me. The pastor's voice became background noise. People I barely knew offered condolences. People who owed him everything gave me polite pats and left. 40 minutes into the ceremony, my phone buzzed. 36 missed calls. All from my parents, my sister, my so-called best friend. I didn't answer. I let it buzz itself blue with unanswered desperation. Their absence became a second wound. Rawer than the first few days after the funeral, I moved like a ghost through my own life. The house felt too big and too small at once. Too big because Ben's laugh once filled it. Too small because every corner held one more memory of what I had lost. I avoided my parents' calls. I wasn't ready to hear false apologies. Then they started talking about settling matters. About assets. About redistribution. My mother said it with the practiced calm of someone buying a car. My father called me childish. My sister sent messages of tragic understanding wrapped in entitlement. "You'll be fine," she wrote. "We can help." Help. The word tasted sour. I discovered the lockbox the night after my mother first stood in my doorway. Ben had a place for everything: deeds, contracts, his small stack of favorite books, a letter for me in case anything happened. I almost didn't open it. Part of me wanted the past to stay respectful and private, folded into the satin lining like the old receipts for repairs, the warranties for life, the little things he had kept. My hands shook when I unfolded the will. Every line was neat, every signature precise. Everything belonged to me. House, accounts, shares in his small company, the storage unit with old tools that had been his pride. No mention of my family. No clause for, in the event of family pressure. Just Ben's handwriting and a sentence that landed like a promise. "Ella, do what you must with what we built." Grief settled into purpose. The law gives rules that the heart does not. Mr. Daniels, family lawyer for both of us, the kind who smells faintly of pipe tobacco and knows exactly what papers a grieving person will need, sat across from me and looked at me the way someone looks at a person who has just been given a weapon and knows how to use it. He was clear, he said. "We can protect this." He explained the options like a map of fortifications. Trusts. Notices. Notices to anyone who might challenge the will. Preemptive filings to prevent sudden transfers. It was clinical and unromantic, but it worked. I listened. They reacted fast and ugly. My father's legal-sounding voice became threats. "You will sign these papers," he said in a voicemail that stank of entitlement. "We'll help you. For the family." My sister sent me a video from the engagement party. Glittering lights, a laughing aunt I hadn't seen since high school, my mother's arm intertwined with the new fiancé, all smiles as though nothing had fractured. Someone even took a photo with their phone, center-lined with champagne flutes, the bride-to-be's hand on her chest, showing off the ring. I pressed my phone to the window glass and felt the cold shake of fury. I did not answer. Instead, I did exactly what Ben would have wanted. I prepared. I fortified the paper trail. I made copies of every important document and sent certified letters to banks, to the registrar who handled share transfers, to the company where Ben's accounts were held. I called the business partners. I walked into offices and introduced myself. I didn't yell. I smiled, the calm, polite smile of someone who knows their truth and is making sure everyone else knows it too. Still, the phone would ring. My father's voice, my mother's rehearsed tears, my sister's thinly veiled impatience. One night I answered because I was tired of hiding. Dad barked right away. "Come home and sign this over. We can make it easier on you." Heard plates rattle in the background. The sound of a life that had prioritized social calendars over loyalty. You don't have to fight us, Ella. You're being dramatic. He said it like he was diagnosing me. I put the phone down. But it wasn't enough to sit behind papers. They had publicly chosen a side already. Choices have consequences, and I wanted theirs measured carefully. So I began to play quieter games, legal and psychological moves that would unlace their comfortable world. First, I froze the accounts that mattered. With Mr. Daniels' help, we placed temporary holds on discretionary transfers and alerted all the vendors linked to my sister's planned wedding. I didn't call the vendors and say, "Cancel her wedding." I called as a concerned third party, an auditor watching a sudden, unusual transfer pattern. I mentioned a pending legal challenge because of an estate dispute that might involve those funds. Contracts were paused pending confirmation. No one wanted to supply linens or flowers if payment could vanish. The caterer, pragmatic and terrified of unpaid bills, began trimming options. The florist called my sister, then called off an already booked rehearsal arrangement. It was precise and surgical, and I felt nothing at first but a cold satisfaction that came from seeing plans that were never supposed to touch me rattle. Meanwhile, I made sure my social posture changed. I did not play the grieving widow card in public. I was firm, concise, and reasonable. I met people who mattered to the business, people who could verify Ben's intentions and the legality of the documents. I had a talk with the manager at the bank and asked him what his process would be if the account holder had named a single beneficiary, and others tried to contest it. He walked me through stop orders and proof thresholds. When my father tried to bribe an old neighbor to vouch for him, the neighbor looked at the papers and said he would testify to the truth, that Ben had been clear. Loyalty didn't always come from the family. It was in the quiet seconds after calls and legal filings that I let the plan turn inward. I wanted the fallout to be more than financial. I wanted their social structure, the glossy image they curated, to crumble with the subtlety of rot. People gossip in our town the way rain soaks clay, slowly, inexorably. I let them gossip. I never started a rumor. I merely stood like a calm tree and let rain wash around them. They tried other tactics. One afternoon my father marched into my house with the heaviness of entitlement and the thin paper of legal threats. He slammed his hand on the kitchen counter and tried to make me feel small. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're alienating people." My sister staged soft sobs and played the part of the concerned sibling. "We only want to help," she said. Their eyes flicked to the lockbox, the mantle, the framed photographs of a life they claimed to have invested in. They expected me to fold. They expected tears and pleading and a return to the little girl who had once begged for approval. I did something steadier. I stood up and walked them through the will, page by page. I read Ben's exact words aloud until the room felt like a courtroom. "These are his words," I said. "This is what he trusted me with. You had your chance to be here, and you chose otherwise." Their faces shifted from anger to a calculating fear. Men who have always gotten what they want do not like the taste of being denied. They escalated. A text, sign or regret it. Another call from an unknown number. "We can make this disappear for you." My pulse jumped once, then steadied. Threats are cheap. I recorded them, documented the calls. If they wanted to be bullies, the law would turn their own voices into evidence. Mr. Daniels set into motion a restraining wedge, not for restraining my family physically, but for preventing any sudden transfers or forged documents from being accepted. He advised me on how to handle intimidation. Do not respond in kind. Let them act and let their behavior be recorded. A small but devastating victory came 3 weeks after Ben's funeral. My sister was supposed to have her big rehearsal dinner, the one they'd spent so much saving for. Vendors called her, cancellation notices in hand. The venue required payment in full 3 months prior. The family had used a line of credit expected to be covered by a large transfer before the wedding. That transfer never happened because it was tied up in accounts that had been frozen for legal verification. People I knew only by name in the guest list began to withdraw. Guests whispered about the family's sudden liquidity issue. People who had once envied them began to look at their gilded life with suspicion. Embarrassment is a sharper knife than confrontation sometimes. The rehearsal dinner shrank. Hymns to appearances and status dwindled. They pushed back harder after that. My father tried to take the moral high ground in public. A speech about family unity. A late-night interview with someone who managed local gossip columns. He painted me as an ungrateful spouse, a person changed by grief. People listened, but a town hears both sides. I had proof, signatures, witnesses. The more they tried to manipulate, the more the ratio of truth to spin favored me. Documents don't lie. Vouchers and recorded messages don't either. And then perhaps the kink I enjoyed most quietly came the moment when a woman who had once kept a careful distance from us, a neighbor who had once been invited to the family's garden parties, sent me a message. "I'm so sorry about your loss," she wrote. "And I'm sorry about their behavior. I had no idea. If you need a witness for anything, I'll come forward." People were tired of being complicit in greed. Reputation matters. You can fake love. You can't fake the way people tell the truth in private. Still, revenge isn't a single crowning move. It's 1,000 weightless things stacked so high that someone who once walked confidently now stumbles. For me, a crucial step was to make sure all legal forms were airtight. Another was psychological, to withdraw attention and let panic grow. They could ring the phone and scream at lawyers and call relatives and hire lawyers to dig into Ben's past. I let them. I watched as their fear got louder and louder. The week of my sister's wedding, when everything should have gleamed, the lights dimmed. Vendors canceled. The fiancé's family, embarrassed, pulled back their support when they heard rumors. My father tried to handle it like a man rearranging a tablecloth. Instead, he revealed his panic to anyone who would listen. People began to whisper that the family looked unstable. Invitations that had once been coveted were now tokens of a family that could not guarantee their promises. At the rehearsal, my sister slammed the door on anyone who criticized her. She found herself alone with a shrinking guest list and a dress that had been paid for with funds that no longer existed at her parents' command. The glitter faded. She cried in the back room while people packed boxes and rescheduled contracts. It was poetic, and yes, I felt the slow, clean pleasure of justice. But retaliation is not just about humiliation. It's about creating space for something better. And I will not pretend I was untouched by the cost. I had loved deeply and lost, and revenge could not bring Ben back. It could only expose what they had done and prevent them from stealing his legacy and my right to grieve in peace. I still spent mornings sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that never tasted quite right. I still found myself opening the lockbox some nights, touching the edges of the letters Ben had left, letting his handwriting steady me. The legal conclusion came not as a thunderclap, but as a slow, confident tide. After a mediation, no one expected me to win because they'd already paid for narratives and hired sympathetic voices. The court affirmed Ben's will. Every asset named was legally recognized as mine. My father tried one last move, a thinly drafted affidavit claiming undue influence, but it fell apart under questioning when witnesses testified that Ben had made the decisions over many years, had discussed them clearly with independent counsel, and had intended the will to stand. When the judge read the verdict, my chest went oddly empty. There was no triumphant laughter, no theatrical moment, just a quiet relief that felt like putting down an enormous weight. I walked out of the courtroom not as someone who'd wanted vengeance in the brutal sense, but as a woman who had reclaimed what had always been hers, and had taught a family that choices are remembered. After things settled, after the movements had stopped and my phone finally stopped pulsing with frantic messages, life returned to a kind of ordinary. My sister's wedding finally happened in a smaller register with fewer smiles. They ran into friends who no longer shared casseroles or invitations. The family dinners I used to attend with a polite smile became silent. They sent quiet flowers months later, gestures that belonged to a different calendar. I accepted none of it. On the anniversary of his death, I went to the cemetery. I sat on the stone bench that had become mine and let the wind move around me. People passed by in their busy tenses. I placed fresh lilies on the grave and spoke to him like I always did. I told him about the legal papers and the gray-haired neighbor who testified and the florist who had told my sister her deposit was safe. And not. I told him I had not become someone monstrous. I had become someone who would not allow theft disguised as family. There is a quiet dignity in that. Revenge, I learned, can take the form of fortitude. It can be the calmness with which you file a paper, the silence you keep when someone begs, the precise moment when you fail to run to comfort them. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just refusing to be small. Life for me after the storm looked less like a vengeance spectacle and more like a reclaimed house. I painted the kitchen. I planted lavender where he used to plant basil. I added a photograph of him on the mantel and a small plaque with his name. I wanted the house to be an honor, not a mausoleum of bitter acts. People asked if I felt guilty. Sometimes. Not for protecting what was ours, but for the satisfaction that came when the consequence of their choices unfolded. There were nights I replayed the funeral again and again, wondering if a different plea would have changed anything. There's always that question. But guilt and justice are not the same. I chose justice. Years later, my sister called. Her voice was thin and weathered, not the bright belle it had once been. "I miss him," she said. That was the most honest thing she had ever said. I listened. I told her the story of the lilies and the legal papers and the way truth reveals itself. I did not invite her back. I did not throw the door open. Some things must sit with decisions. If you ever find yourself abandoned when you need people most, know this. Absence is a choice, and choices have consequences. You can spend your grief hollow and bitter, or you can let it mold your focus. You can pick up the documents, call a lawyer, put paper in order. You can be quiet and precise and let the world respond to your steadiness. Ben trusted me with everything he had. He never asked me to become cruel. All he asked was that I be true to him. I honored that by being better than they expected, not by breaking them in the most violent way, but by keeping the life we built intact and refusing to hand it to people who preferred parties to presents. I still miss him. I always will. I still wake in the dark and whisper his name like a prayer. But I sleep better now, knowing that the house that holds his memory is mine, protected not by anger but by careful, patient truth. And when the world tries to measure grief against convenience again, I will remember the quiet power of keeping one's boundaries. That is my revenge, not the noise but the right to mourn without being robbed. If you like this story, this is one of the kinds of true feeling revenge tales I share on Creepy Revenge. Tell me, have you ever been abandoned when it mattered most? Comment below.